Willkommen, bienvenue, and welcome to the Modding of Isaac remix with Light. And in these episodes, we're going to go back to the old Modding of Isaac episodes that we did and make them better. There's so many things that we've learned in the past 54 episodes that really could improve our items, our code, everything by quite a bit. Whether it's wrong-headed programming, or improvements to the API, or things that we've learned about the API that can just make the whole process go a bit more smoothly. So we're going to start off in here, just show you which one we're revisiting, which you know by the title. We're going back to Green Candle. We've got ourselves a nice passive item. It'll do some very basic things for us, and I'll show you how all of that works. So we've got ourselves a green candle that spawned in the room when we started. We pick it up, and it gives you a spirit heart. And then you walk into a room, you run into some things, and eventually they start getting poisoned. And that's all this candle really does. It just picks things from the room, and it poisons them. There's a random chance every update of something being poisoned, and then all it does is it goes through and poisons them until they're all dead. Don't even have to fire any tears. It's a very simple passive item. So let's take a look at all of the steps for making it work. I'm not going to do a tutorial on GIMP or Paint.net or Sprite this time, but I will show you where the sprites go and what you need to do with them. So let's head back over into our computer. And here we are in Green Candle 2. I still have Green Candle 1 for reference. And on the right here, we've got the Binding of Isaac resources. So if you don't know where to find this folder, you need to go into Steam and then show the local files via settings. And it's a few steps, but you can look those up. You just need to find your Binding of Isaac resources folder, which you probably found in the first episode. And it shows you all sorts of stuff from the base game. Now, I'll warn you, there is no Lua for the passive items or for the bosses or anything. The game was not written in Lua. So that code is not currently available to us. But I could be talked into doing a series where I recreate the vanilla items such that you know how you could go about making them. So here is where you find all sorts of useful things, particularly items.xml. This gives you a reference for how to define a passive item. So the basics include setting up items in the first place. You grab this first bit. And then if you're familiar with XML, great. If not, you just copy and paste. You grab a line. This is an item. In this case, raw liver. Starts off with passive, saying it's a passive item. It's not a familiar. It's not an active item. It is passive. The description is the subtext. So when you see raw liver, it says HP up underneath of it. GFX is where you find the sprite. Now, it's not just sitting in a GFX folder somewhere. It's sitting in GFX items, and then collectibles 016 rawliver.ping. Then, hearts is how much it heals you when you pick it up. So if you're down at half a heart and you pick up raw liver, boom, fully healed. It's pretty lovely. Its ID number is 16. It gives you 2 full hearts. 4 is the number of half heart containers that it gives you, so this gives you 2 full heart containers, and it's called raw liver. And then this little slash here is just saying, now we have closed off this passive item, and we're good to go. Now, this is a whole lot to look at, a whole lot to take in all at once. So what we're going to do is switch over to mine. This items.xml is what we need for Green Candle. This first line has to be exactly like this, and this last line has to be exactly like this, or your game will crash. XML is the fastest way to crash your game. Any tiny little error will cause the whole game to crash as you start it. So if you get a full crash, check your XML. Lua can do it, it's a lot more difficult. Then we've got passive, like I said. Now this cache right here is not strictly necessary unless you're updating stats. I like to keep it there nonetheless, completely empty, even for items that don't work with your stats. Now, by stats, I mean your damage, your shot speed, your movement speed. Those are what I mean by stats. Heart containers are different. Then we have the name, Green Candle, that's the big name. Across the top, then you have description, an odd kind of wax, which is the subtitle, GFX, the name of the image, so greencandle.ping, and then soul hearts equals 2. So that means it gives you a full soul heart when you pick it up. You could also give black hearts this way, heart containers. You don't have to worry about any Lua to make that happen. You can do it via Lua like we did in the original episode, but it's not really necessary. It's a whole lot quicker and easier just to do it here. Now, where is that file? Because you don't see it right here. But you do see 2 folders in addition to your main.lua and your metadata.xml. This metadata is for when you upload it to the store and for identifying it in list. So if you ever want to change its name from the name of the folder to something else, you modify the metadata. Main.lua is the code that gets run. Resources are things from the original game. Anything that you put in this resources folder will replace anything that is in the main game that has the same name. So if you create some new sprites or anything, you can put it in resources and it won't cause any trouble. But if you want to replace something from the base game, you put it in here. But make sure you update it anytime the game updates. Because if Nicholas adds an item and you don't add it in yours, cause a game crash. It's no good. So resources tend to be images. It tends to be XML files from the original game. Content, on the other hand, is brand new content. This is stuff that gets added to the end of what already exists. So where do you think we're going to find our green candle stuff? Well, a little bit of both. In content, you got the items.xml that looks just like this, because it just takes this passive item and tacks it onto the end of the previous items.xml. But if we go into resources, all we have are the GFX, items, collectibles, green candle. Now you'll notice this collectibles wasn't here. It says GFX items and then nothing. Well, the game automatically puts that collectibles in there. It doesn't say it here, it's implied. So if you put this greencandle.ping in GFX items, the game's not going to see it. You have to put it inside collectibles. And then you have to have a .png file. Now you can make this in paint.net, you can make it in GIMP, Sprite, good old-fashioned Paint that's being retired. Whatever can make a PNG file for you, you can make it for this game. However, particularly if you use in paint.net, you have to be certain to save it as a 32-bit ping. Paint.net is nice and friendly and will look at your sprite and go, oh, you've only got like 10 colors here. I'm going to make it an 8-bit ping for you. It'll save tons of space. But if you do that, the game will pick it up, put it in, and interpret it as if it were 32, which leads it to be completely black with a red border. So if you ever run into red borders around your stuff, it's because you didn't use a 32-bit ping for your sprite. So remember that, red border, change it to 32-bit. And you've got that option when you go to save it, so it'll be fine. So that's content in resources, and then in main.lua, we've got the code that actually makes it work. Now, several things have changed from the previous episode, so you'll want to follow along. The first line is the same all the time. You register the mod such the game knows what's going on. Then, I add the item's ID. So Isaac, get item ID by name. You give it the name of your item. And I put it in the enumeration from the game itself. Collectible type is available from the game. Anytime you work with an item, you can grab its ID number through this enumeration. And so by adding our item to that, it's possible that another mod can check whether or not yours is installed and add extra cross-mod compatibility this way. Kind of fun. And could help to alleviate a little bit of cross-pollination between multiple mods with multiple green candles and can see whether or not some other mod with a green candle has already been installed and be like, fine, you can have it. But that could also cause a problem if both of them are in the game and you don't automatically change to their green candle when yours is picked up. So always be thinking about what happens if someone else's mod had the same brilliant idea that you did. Now, we don't include some of that code in this, but in the future, we very well might. Now, this right here creates a table. I'm going to say local green candle, because we don't really need green candle to be a global variable. We don't need it to be available to everybody. So we call it local. That makes it just available to our mod. And then this equals, and then a bracket, creates a table where we associate range with 320, chance with 1%, duration with 100, and damage is 3.5. You need a comma at the end of each, because this doesn't have to be broken onto multiple lines. It could be written like so. And it means exactly the same thing. But you're like, Light, what even is a table? All it does is create this word that you can then add other things to. And so you keep everything associated with green candle all in one place, such that you never have to wonder, well, what did I call that thing for the green candle damage? Well, it's all in green candle. And so are our functions for working with green candle, because we might add additional items to this mod. So we're not going to attach the functions to the mod, we're going to attach the functions to green candle itself. So this table has a couple of things that are constants. These are never going to change. During playing the game, doesn't change. The range is the same, the chance is the same, duration is the same. That's why I capitalize them completely. It's just a shorthand way of knowing that that is never going to change. Similar to this collectible green candle. That item's ID number, never going to change. And so we have these constants that we're going to use a little bit later. Then we want to bring the green candle into existence. Poof. We only want to do it in the very first room when at the very beginning of starting the first run. Well, maybe not the first run. When they start the run, you want this to work. And so, what do? Well, you need a callback. Callbacks are functions that get run when a certain thing happens. And so this function right here is a callback. I use those words quite a bit, and so it's important for you to understand what they mean when I say a callback. So a callback is a function that is run when something happens. Well, when does this run? When a run starts. Well, really, when the game starts regardless. It's not just when they first start a run, but also when they load it from a save file that this happens. Then we have a little bit of code that goes, did they just start it, or did they load it from a save file? And so we have this callback, but it's not going to run unless you tell it to. It's the most wonderful and terrible thing about programming. It only does exactly what you tell it to. And so what we do is we take our mod, and then we add a callback. Note the colon here versus the period here versus the period here. This colon gives this object to the function. I know that doesn't make much sense to you. It doesn't really need to, but the vast majority of functions that you're going to work with in this API use a colon, because they want to give the mod or give the player or give whatever it is to the function that you're calling. The biggest exception is when it's Isaac dot something. You don't pass the whole game into this function. The function works fine on its own. So we have mod colon add callback. Which callback do we add? Well, that is an enumeration. So if we head over into our browser Here are the Lua docs, which are included with Afterbirth Plus. You can load these up and take a gander at all of the things that are available to you. You'll want to read through... Oh, that's not available. Oh, it seems to be slightly broken. You click on each of these, and they'll give you a little bit of information on all sorts of things, like writing shaders. But these modules are most useful for these enumerations, which are just putting numbers associated with things that you want to reference by name. So there are a lot of directions. Left, up, right, down. They're actually numbers. But it's much easier to work with the names such that people don't have to remember, is left 0, left 1, left 2? I don't, just do direction dot left. And similarly, anytime you see something like this, entity type dot entity pickup, that's an enumeration. Entity type, entity pickup. You don't need to know that it's number 5. And we do this such that your code is more readable. Because if I had Isaac spawn 5, 3, 528, it'd be very difficult to read this and be like, oh, I know exactly what that... No, it's not. It's not helpful. Whereas here, mod callbacks, MC post game started, that's very clear. As opposed to trying to go in here, going into mod callbacks and being like, oh yeah, I totally know which one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. I totally know which one callback 16 is. No. You use the enumeration because then people go, which callback are they adding? Post game started. Great. And then you go, which function is the callback? Green candle, dot, on game start. So we have a colon here, a dot here, a colon here. I know it's a little difficult to remember these things, but with practice, you'll know when to use the dot, when to use the colon. Here, we use the dot. Here, we use the colon. You can use a dot here, but then you'll have to put something here. But for the sake of saving you from typing things that you don't need, we use the colon. It's a nice little shorthand. So every time the game is started, whether from save or otherwise, it runs this function. You come up here, what's it do? Beginning of run initialization. So if not from save. So when this happens, it passes in a variable that says, is it from a save or not? Did they just start or did they come in from a save? If it's not from a save, then you do things. It's a nice English way of thinking about things. If not from save, then stuff. Now this line, not necessary. That's just a remnant from the old days. Isaac.spawn, and then what do we spawn? You need the type, it's a pickup. You need the variant, which is collectible, and then you need the subtype, which is the ID that we got from the file. That's what this is doing right here. Get item ID by name, looks up the item in the XML, gets you its ID number. But you're going, there was no ID number here. Well, that's important that you don't put an ID number in your items.xml in content, because the game will assign one for it. Because if you have a mod, and they have a mod, and everyone has a mod, how do you know what ID to even give it? The game knows. It can just pile them all on the end, keep giving them higher and higher numbers, and then we use this to look up what number it was given. And then you have a nice enumeration that you don't need to know what number it is. Then you tell it where to spawn it. 320-300 is just a place I like in the room. Then you give it the velocity. 0, 0 tells it don't go anywhere. And then what spawned it. Nil means nothing. And here we have spawned our item if the game started not from a save. Now you need an end to match every if and an end for every function. And the program that I'm using, which is Notepad++, has a nice little line that helps you track whether or not everything is lined up correctly, and whether function has an end and if has an end, and then this, which opens up some parentheses, has an end. It doesn't need the word end, it just needs to open the parentheses and then eventually close them. Because all of this can be written on one line, just like we did with this, or you can spread it out such that it's easier to read. I like making it easier to read because good coding is about making it do what you want. Great coding is about making it such that everyone else knows what it does too. So here's how we start it and spawn the item. Now, how do we make it work? You need another callback. So this function right here does what you need it to do. And then you need to add that callback to make it happen when you want. Well, when do you want it? Every update. So it's not exactly every rendered frame, but it's every update. It's 30 times per second. And use MC post pEffect update. Now, pEffect update, as opposed to update, really just depends on whether or not you've got the player involved in what you're looking at. And in our case, you do. So we use pEffect such that it hands you the player and you can move on with your life. And then green candle dot on pUpdate as opposed to colon on pUpdate. Oh, and an important thing to remember. These functions, when they're defined, have to have a different name than every other function in your mod. Because if you have two things called on pUpdate, it doesn't know which one to do. So if you've got one that's pUpdate for this item and another pUpdate for another item, if you make them if you call them the same thing, the second one replaces the first. And the last one that you define will win. So this doesn't have to be called pUpdate. It could just be called on update, or just update, or pUpdate, or GC update. So long as this name matches this name. I use on pUpdate because it's easy to tell what it's for. It's on either player or passive update, whichever one makes more sense to you. But it's a pEffect update, so I use pUpdate. These have to match, but what they say is totally up to you. So when this happens, 30 times every second, it hops up here, grabs you, the current player, and then does the green candle functionality. You'll notice these are different colors and don't really look like code. So you've got this green here. Well, these two dashes make things into a comment. It's not run. It just gives you a little bit of text that tells you what's going on. It's generally good practice to put these sorts of things in your code to remind yourself what you are doing, such that when you come back to it 3 weeks later, you have some idea what you were thinking when you were writing this. So, should we poison something? If player, has collectible. So this just checks, do they have that item? And then we have our enumeration that we defined all the way at the top. Do they have our item? And you can use ands and ors in a logical fashion. With ors, one of them has to be true. With and, both of them have to be true. So in this case, you have to have the collectible and a random number is generated that was less than or equal to green candle.chance. So up here, we've got 0.01. We have to roll a number between 0 and 1 that is less than 1, which means you have a 1% chance, because it's a uniform random number. So you have a 1% chance that this will be less than or equal to the chance. Math.random gives you a random number, 0 to 1. There are things that you can put in here for it to give you whole numbers, which we will see in a moment. Because math.random is quite handy when you've got randomness that is not dependent on the seed. So things that happen a lot, you don't need to seed that. People aren't going to be able to recreate those random events. But things that happen slowly, like which item you get, that should be seeded. What card you draw from the deck of cards, that should be seeded. But whether or not you poison an enemy, that can be random. Now, what can we poison? Well, we can only poison enemies, so we need to grab the enemies that are in the room. Now, this is different from how we did it before. because this is a new function. Some people still don't even know about it. Local target. So we make a little variable to hold our targets. Equals Isaac.findInRadius. So that here we're back with Isaac dot, sort of like we had up here, Isaac.spawn. A lot of times you're going to use colons, like player colon has collectible. Here we use the dot. And then we're checking from the player's current position within a radius of greencandle.range, which is 320. And then entity partition.enemy. So these entity partitions, it's just another enumeration. You just come into your lovely documentation files and you go to entity partition, and you can have familiars, bullets, tiers, enemies, pickups, players, and effects. And so this is going to pull enemies. If you need enemies or bullets, you can use some spelling skills, partition, dot, and then bullet. It did say bullet, didn't it? Yeah. Which are likely the projectiles that are fired by enemies. So you can do partition.enemy or just a little piped or that's found by the backslash. You hit shift backslash on most keyboards and it'll give you that pipe. Entity partition.bullet. It'll combine those two because this is a binary flag. And it'll give you enemies and bullets. But in our case, we just want enemies. So it'll find all of the enemies within range of the player's current position. Brilliant. Then, if the number of targets is greater than 0, then we do stuff. If there are no targets, you don't do anything. But it's important to check that there are no targets first. Because if you try to do the rest of this and there are no targets, it's going to scream at you. And that's just no good. So which thing should we poison? Well, you go local, current target. So we grab ourselves a target, put it in a variable. Equals targets, and then these little brackets, look at the targets table, which has many, many rows of things that are in the room that you could target. Sort of like this guy up here. We had range, chance, duration, and damage. It's like this table. But instead of doing it by name, you do it by number. So you've got enemy 1, enemy 2, enemy 3, so on down the line. And so we grab a random number from 1 to the number of targets. So if there's only 1, it'll just give you the number 1, and you'll get that target. But if there's 20 of them, it'll give you a number between 1 and 20, and it'll give you whichever one from this pile of targets that it found. And then you have to check whether or not that enemy can in fact be poisoned. You don't want to try to poison something like those stone heads that fire the shockwaves at you. You don't want to poison those. So you go, if current target is vulnerable, so you can hurt it, is active. I'm not entirely certain how that differs from certain things off the top of my head, but you want to check if it's active, and you want to make sure it's not dead. You don't want to poison a dead enemy. It's just mean. Then, so you see, if this and that and not this, I break them up onto separate lines so you can see each of the conditions one by one. Then, poison them. Current target, colon, add poison. Now, for some reason, you need an entity reference here. It's just how it is. Certain things about this modding, you just accept. Sometimes you use the player, sometimes you use a reference to the player, sometimes you use color, sometimes you use K color. You find what is needed and you accept it. And move on with your life. So, current target, colon, add poison, entity reference of the player, such that it knows that it's you that is poisoning it. Then, green candle dot duration, that's this duration here, 100. And then green candle dot damage, which is this up here as well. This way, you don't have to find where in your code you added the poison. You just work here and go, oh, that was too much damage, let's make it 2.5 instead. It saves you a lot of work in the fine-tuning process when you're trying to make it a nice, well-balanced mod. If you keep all your constants at the top, you don't have to worry about where in your code you use them. And so that causes the poison. And now for every if, there is an end. If, end, function, end. And that's all it takes to make this. It took us half an hour to get here. But the more you work with it, the easier these things get. You can make shorter episodes when everyone knows what all of the things do, but at this point, I'm not assuming anyone has even watched the original episode 3. These are all the details that you need to be able to make this happen. I'm still not going to post the code because it's important for you to type these things, and it's important to make errors, and it's important to solve the errors. Speaking of which, solving errors is really important. So you need to be able to find out what errors you made. So whenever you run into an error, oh, and you will, we all do, a lot, you go to your Afterbirth Plus folder, not the mods folder, Afterbirth Plus. And then you go into log.txt, and then you're going to do a search. So Control F, Apple F if you're on Mac, and you're going to search for capital ERR. Whenever you have an error, it'll have that in one of the lines. Now, right now, we have no error, so it's not going to come up. So what we can do is actually introduce an error, such that you can see what it's going to say to you when you have an error. So let's get rid of this then. It's a very important then. It's going to freak out if we don't have it. So we did that. We hit save. We come back in here, and let me make sure we're back in Isaac. So we go into the console. So if you don't know how to get into the console, it's the little back tick. It's with the tilde, it's next to the 1 on most keyboards. And then what we're gonna do is type Lua mod, and then the name of the mod, Green Candle 2. And it says success. But it actually failed, because if we try to go somewhere and run into some enemies, it's not going to poison them anymore. Because we introduced an error that made it not work. And if we restart the run, it's not here. If we exit the game and we turn the mod off and back on again, and we start ourselves a new run, the item's not here, because that tiny error made the whole thing explode. So what do? We go here, and we open up the log. And then we search for error. Oh, it's still the old log file. Notepad++ doesn't automatically update files when they're changed. And so you have to reopen them. There are programs that will update it as you go, but Notepad++ just isn't one of them. So we found a line with ERR on it. Should probably show you. ERR on it. So what it says is my green candle 2 main.lua on line 43, that's what this colon 43 means, then expected near current target. So let's go and check what that means. So we go back to main.lua, we go to line 43, and it says, then expected near current target. So what it's saying is something right before this word is missing a then, which is exactly what we did. We took away the then before current target. Now, certain error messages are not as clear as that one, but they will always tell you where the problem is and in which file the problem is. If somehow you have an error that says scripts/main.lua, that's not your file, that's the game's file. That's it complaining about your mod callback enumeration. So if you spelled this incorrectly, or didn't capitalize it correctly, or used a colon instead of a dot, or something weird, it'll complain about scripts /main.lua. Now, I think 35 minutes is enough for this episode. We've gone back through, we've seen what additional things we can do using the new code that has been added to the API. We've cleaned up our code quite a bit, and for those of you that are new to modding, this is a good introduction to making yourself a passive item that does a thing and appears at the beginning of the run such that you can test it out without having to use the console or my loadout mod. I would like to make several more of these, so if there's a particular episode that you've already watched that you would like to see redone because of new content, feel free to let me know in the comments. If you'd like to see more of these episodes on just working my way through it, like updating stats videos, feel free to leave a comment, and I would be happy to see it, respond to it, and make these videos. But that's all for this episode. I will see you in the next episode of the Modding of Isaac Remix with Light.